We are Gardner and Senay Gokcebel. Our research was following an introductory statistics course, and the project is representation of race and sex in children's books. We would like to thank our co-author Lukas Resch, our instructor Javier Flores, and Grinnell's Drake Library.
What piqued our interest in the topic was the conversation surrounding representation in literature. We wanted to acquire data that could possibly begin to answer if children's picture books are equally representative of different sexes and races. Some of our understanding of this topic comes from background research. Evidence revealed by census data shows an increasing diversity in the United States. How this diversity is represented is extremely important, especially looking at children, who are most affected by what they're exposed to.
A paper by Hughes Hassel reveals a disproportionate representation of race and sex in transition books, which are short story books. Another paper by McCappy reveals a disproportionate representation of males in book titles. We thought it'd be both interesting and important to use models to analyze representation in children's books, as children are shaped by the world around them, and a lot of this being what they are exposed to. We thought it'd be very important to look at picture books as an influential form of media.
The purpose of our research was to investigate the representation of race and sex of characters and protagonists in children's picture books in an attempt to identify any biases towards a specific sex or race. We hypothesized that, like Hughes-Hassel and McCabe's results, that there will be an overrepresentation of white and male characters.
So for this project, there was no readily available data sets regarding representation in children's picture books, so we decided to collect the data. The data was collected from the children's section at Grinnell's Drake Library. There, the shelves are labeled with letters, so we generated random letters and blindly picked a picture book. We then went on to count the race and sex of every character, noting the protagonist. We included background characters too. The data we would use is to analyze this problem were as follows. The number of characters in the book that were either female or male, the total number of characters in the book that were either people of color or white. We made sure not to double count. We also recorded the protagonist and their sex or race, which are both binary variables. The reason we did this was because we were collecting the data and we wanted the data collection to be less likely to involve human errors. Because we used binary variables, we were able to better and easily differentiate between the categories of characters.
Through the use of a randomization test for differences in proportion, we were able to find if there was a statistically significant difference in proportions of male characters and female characters by book, and run the same analysis but with proportions of white characters and proportions of characters of color. The rationale for using this test is that with a statistically significant p-value, we can assume that the difference in proportions would be that of which we found or more extreme in our sample. This was important to us because we wanted to quantify a significant difference in proportions and find evidence against the null that either both sexes are represented equally or that both white characters and characters of color are represented equally. Additionally, we were interested in comparing the protagonist's sex across race. To do this, we used a chi-squared goodness of fit test. Our null hypothesis, or expected results, would have been equal across each combination of sex or race. If the differences between the observed and expected counts are large enough, we can suspect the validity of the null. If we were to reject the null, we could conclude that some protagonists are overrepresented. We also made sure to test for the confounding variable of publication year and author sex. This was to make sure that the protagonist's sex and race were not confounded by either of those. The chi-squared tests that we ran showed that they were not.
Surprisingly, we found a higher representation of female to male characters, with 55% being female. Though we didn't observe what we hypothesized for sexes of characters, we found an overrepresentation of white characters, where 60% of characters were white. Both of our p-values were statistically significant, and we were able to conclude that in this sample, female characters and white characters are overrepresented in children's books at Drake Library.
The chi-square goodness of fit test for association indicated no statistical significance, so we were able to conclude that female protagonists of color, male protagonists of color, white female protagonists, and white male protagonists are all equally represented. However, this study coded race as binary, people of color and white, which may account for those results.
The fact that we were able to identify the difference in proportion of characters and the ability to identify overrepresentation in the protagonists by race and sex means that there is potential to both identify these factors on a larger scale and to apply this research to other things across a larger spectrum of ethnicities, or even apply these ideas to sentiment analysis. Our findings imply that we should strive to make representation equal, especially in children's books, where there are visual images associated with characters, and to make representation equal in protagonists across a larger spectrum of variables, not just binary.
We do want to note that because of time and location constraints, we were unable to obtain a larger sample size from a more diverse set of locations. Therefore, we're only able to generalize our findings to the children's section of Drake Library. This is a library in a town with a progressive college and is likely well-funded. Further research should include a larger sample size, study across various locations to determine any factors like lack of funding, price of book, population demographics, and to see if they impact character and protagonist representation.
Here are our references. Any questions?
Great, that was really interesting. All right, so I see the first question we've been asked is, what class best prepared you to do this research?
We only took an introductory statistics class, and it was really interesting to be able to use the class for different areas. Say for this project especially, it was sociology that impacted our thinking into choosing a topic for research.
Yeah. And someone else asked, was there, as you were going through the books, were there any variables you wished you had actually decided you'd also collect, like that you thought would maybe inform or give you more information about the distribution of these variables you cared about?
Yeah, we actually, when we were collecting the data, we were taking note of the ISBN numbers so that we could go back and look at the books if we decided if there was anything else that we wanted to analyze. And so when we were doing the chi-square test, we thought that there could be confounding variables. So we went back and looked at those exact same books and found the year that they were published and the author's sex. So we could look at those as confounding variables.
Yeah, great. And so there's also a question here about broader impacts. So what would you say are the broader impacts of your work? Who would you want to share this work with?
Well, I think that that's a really good question, and that's a question that we're still trying to answer. But we definitely want to share. I think just the first step was presenting our work, was getting our work out there for other people to see, because it's an important topic. It's something that's important to both of us, to all of us, everyone who worked on the research. And so we think that like further analysis, especially I think computer science, we were looking at how sentiment analysis and computers can be used to do this kind of data, so that you don't have to go to the library and collect a sample size and just do all the data analysis yourself. You can write an algorithm that will do it for you. And so looking at the implications for like other fields of studies, we definitely would want to share that with the people in those fields.
Yes, also in the field of education where children are more exposed to children's books or picture books, it's important to identify these factors like representation to be able to shape a better future. And so we think that this research, if applied to a larger field, could impact how children are educated, how they grow up, and how they think generally.
Yeah, that's great. So multiple people have had the same question. So they're wondering what you did when you picked a children's book with non-human protagonists.
We eliminated the books, and
I think we only picked up one book that did not have human.
Right, it was I think the animals. Yeah, we were lucky enough that through the random assigning and blind picking, we didn't really pick any books that included like characters that were either animals or different, I guess.
Anything that wasn't human.
Yeah. We only picked one and we eliminated that and went on to randomly pick another book. Yeah.
Okay, all right. And then one last question for you. So someone asked, is the representation of children's picture books in a university library likely to be similar to that of a neighborhood library? And if not, how do you think it's different?
We don't think it's similar because university libraries tend to be, I guess, more progressive in a sense that they are more aware of the diversity, the representation, and how this could affect people and children. So we think that because we chose Grinnell's Drake Library and we found a lot more diversity, we don't think that this necessarily applies to a neighborhood library because of the reasons we talked about, them being progressive, being more aware of the diversity, etc.
Having the funding to be able to buy the books that they needed to buy.
Yes.
And I think that that just goes to say that future research definitely needs to be done so that you can compare across like the different locations and what surrounds those locations and any other confounding variables or variables that could impact the representation of sex and race in characters.
Yeah, great. All right, thanks so much.